this again and again as a good community. Thank you.
Rodriguez. I am one of the EMS lieutenants here at Atascocita Fire Department. That is Sal Malinowski. He's one of our in-charge paramedics and a field training officer. And we will have Battalion Chief David Rourke joining us in a little bit to also help with skills. We're also all part of our RTF instructor group and the tactical EMS team here at Atascocita Fire Department. So we're here to teach you, as you know, Stop the Bleed. Stop the Bleed is the product of the Hartford Consensus, which is the product of a committee that was put together by the American College of Surgeons, the Committee on Trauma, the Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care of the Department of Defense, and a few other groups that came together after the Sandy Hook shooting in Sandy Hook in Connecticut. Basically, what was realized was that there were a lot of lessons learned in military medicine throughout the 2000s after the war, or during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, that had not been applied to civilian medicine. So a lot of civilians were dying needlessly because these lessons hadn't bridged over to civilian medicine yet completely. So there's a lot of departments that were already applying these lessons, but they hadn't been applied fully. So the Hartford Consensus was basically a way to make sure that civilian EMS and the civilian population at large was applying these lessons well and minimize death, needless death, in the United States, as we were doing with our soldiers overseas. So basically we have to give credit where credit is due. The Committee on Trauma, the American College of Emergency Physicians, the National Association of Emergency Medical Technicians, and the Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care. So like I said, there's a few national organizations that came up with this. These are all science-based organizations that have worked together to develop this product. We do change the presentation around a little bit here, just to add more stuff, and the presentation in Texas is actually different than the presentation in the rest of the country because we add a few more things. Because in Texas, we expect that you can do a few more things. So the last few slides are actually not shown anywhere else, and I'll tell you when we get there. It's not that we're doing different science or anything like that. It's just we want you to take into account a few more things because we have a little bit more faith in our citizens than the rest of the country does, apparently. So it's the joint effort of a few different organizations. It's the best practice of how to manage life-threatening bleeding. Just so y'all know, some images shown during this presentation may be disturbing to some people. I think there's only a couple. They're just bleeding, but if anything does disturb you, feel free to step out. So, the number one cause of preventable death after injury in the United States is bleeding. The number one cause of death for people under 45 years old in the United States is trauma. Of those, it's estimated that a third of those deaths are preventable. Sorry, a quarter of them. So, most of them are due to exsanguination prior to hospital arrival. That means that last year, of the 214,000 deaths due to trauma of people under 45, 53,500 of them wouldn't have died if appropriate care had been provided earlier. That's 53,500 people that would still be with their families. Since Columbine, we've had over 200 school shootings. I actually updated that last year when we didn't have any, thanks to Corona. Now that schools have opened back up, we've added a few more to that number. Violent crime has been on the rise in Texas since 2017. Trauma, like I said, is the leading cause of death in the U.S. for people under 45 years old. We have been harping, and the last school fire death in the U.S. was on December 1st, 1958 in Chicago. Who here has taken part in a fire drill? Who here has taken part in a CPR class? Exactly. So, the leading cause of death in the U.S. for people over 45 years old is cardiac issues. So we harp on that all the time. Everybody knows where there's AEDs. Everybody knows how to use an AED. Everybody knows how to do CPR. Everybody knows what to do if a fire alarm goes off. And I'm not trying to take away from all that. Because we do fire drills so people aren't dying in fires in schools anymore. People have learned to do CPRs, and Sal and I can both tell you that because of bystander CPR, we both have patients that walk out of the hospital. What we're trying to do is prevent more death. I'm very passionate about this class because I used to work in a rural area, and I've had, on both sides, I've had patients that, on the one hand, if people had managed them appropriately, they wouldn't have died. And, you know, there's a 12-year-old walking around somewhere in Brenham who, because there happened to be a guy who had a tourniquet in his car driving by on 290 at the right time, who applied a tourniquet, that kid got to spend Christmas with his family. So our goal is 0 preventable deaths from trauma. Now, I'm not saying people aren't going to die from trauma. People are always going to die. But let's bring that 53,000 number to 0. If people don't need to die, if we provide appropriate care, let's do it. We know that these deaths happen early, so we need quick care. So we need to bring the lessons of the 75th Ranger Regiment of the U.S. Army here to the U.S. Basically what they did is their leadership took ownership. They realized there were a lot of Rangers that were dying that didn't need to die. They created a whole blood program where they basically took blood out to the field. They used dried plasma, they expanded the protocols, they let their medics do more. We've done all these things. Sal and I can do things that when I became a paramedic I never thought I'd be able to do. I didn't think I'd ever have an ultrasound in the back of my ambulance. I never thought I'd be able to run labs. I never thought I'd be able to get blood in the back of an ambulance. But I've done all those things. But this isn't enough. The biggest thing that the Rangers did was they taught every Ranger how to use a tourniquet, how to use a chest seal, to put blankets on people. Because at the end of the day, calling medic to the guy that because their buddy got shot wasn't enough. What they needed to do was, hey, my buddy got shot, I need to be able to do something about it because I'm the guy that's right there. That's the same thing we need to do here. So expanding the scope of practice of non-medics and distributing knowledge and equipment, that's what we're doing right now. So unfortunately, I don't have the money to buy you all tourniquets. And I don't have the money to give you all equipment. We are constantly working on getting grants and partnerships and public-private partnerships and all that stuff so that we can get those out in the community. Our state legislators and our congressmen and senators up at the federal level have passed some laws to where these kits are out in schools and in hospitals all over the state now and all over the country. So they're in more places now. But in my ideal world, they would be everywhere. Everybody would have one in their car and, you know, at home and all over the place. But these kits are $45. So unfortunately, I don't have enough money to buy one for every house in Atascocita. But we're getting there. So today we're going to expand your scope of practice and we're going to distribute some knowledge. So where can you use this training? Everywhere. You can use it at home. Basically, trauma happens everywhere. Accidents happen everywhere. You can use it at a car accident, weather events. You know, shootings unfortunately happen all over the place in our society nowadays. Use it at school, even if it's not a shooting. All kinds of things happen where people bleed out, where people have the potential to bleed out. We just want you to be ready. So the goals after this class are that you are able to identify life-threatening bleeding and stop it. However you need to. And we're going to give you a few tools to be able to stop that bleeding, whether or not you have a tourniquet or a stop the bleed kit with you. But at the end of the day, it only takes a couple of minutes for somebody to bleed out. And unfortunately, it takes us a few minutes to get to somebody. We have some pretty good response times here, but in 5 to 7 minutes, where somebody can still bleed out. And unfortunately, it's irresponsible to the taxpayers for us to put an ambulance on every corner just waiting, because most of those ambulances wouldn't move. And nobody wants to pay $1 million a year for an ambulance that's not going to move. So, we'll start with this. Your safety is your first priority, no matter where you are. If it's an industrial accident, a weather event, a shooting, anything like that, if you're injured, you can't help others, and you're just creating another patient for EMS. And you don't want to do that. So don't get yourself hurt trying to help somebody else. Help others only when it's safe to do so. And if the situation changes or becomes unsafe while you're helping somebody else, get out of there. Stop, move to safety. If you can, take the victim with you. But again, don't hurt yourself when you're trying to help somebody else. At that point, let the professionals handle it. We spend a lot of time in classes and schools and all that stuff to learn how to handle these situations. While we can use your help, and that's the reason for these classes, we don't want you getting yourself hurt and then creating 2 patients, because that's just going to delay the care of the original patient. Wear gloves if you can. That's another reason why I like to stop the bleed kits. They have gloves in them. If you get blood on you, make sure to clean any part of your body that the blood has touched. Tell the healthcare providers that get there that you've got blood on you, and make sure you wash your hands. Basically, the big thing that they're going to tell you is wash your hands, wash whatever got blood on you. For the most part, as long as you don't get it inside you, rub your eyes or whatever, you'll be good. Your skin is a great barrier, but if you've got gloves, wear them. Alright, so the ABCs of bleeding control are alert 911, find the bleeding, compress the bleeding. The first thing you want to do is alert 911, just like in CPR class, because if you haven't called 911 and you start CPR, then nobody's coming to help you, right? And the only time when you can stop CPR is when the rescuers arrive. It's the same thing with stopping your bleeding control. You stop it once we get there. But if you don't call us, we're not coming. So call 911 first. Make sure that we know that something's going on. Or better yet, get somebody else to call 911 while you do this. If you're the one that's trained on stopping bleeding, make sure you're the one stopping the bleeding. And get somebody else to call 911. Anybody can call 911. Know your location and follow the instructions provided by the 911 operator. Finally, about 2 years ago, they started allowing 911 operators to give stop the bleed instructions, especially tourniquets. They used to not be allowed to do that. They've been giving CPR instructions for about 20 years, and they couldn't give tourniquet instructions because for whatever reason, the College of Emergency Medical Dispatch is still stuck on tourniquets might hurt people. If we look at the evidence and we look at the tens of thousands of soldiers and Marines and airmen and stuff that have been hurt in Iraq and Afghanistan, I can tell you that tourniquets don't hurt anybody. I mean, they'll be painful, but they're not going to cause lasting harm. Of the thousands and thousands of soldiers that had tourniquets applied to them in the conflicts in the Middle East, there was one person that had a bad outcome due to the tourniquet. And that bad outcome, even though he got to save his arm and it saved his life, is that every once in a while he gets some tingling in his fingers. But he's alive. So they counted it as a bad outcome because no study can be perfect. So you have to find something. Tourniquets are great. I know a lot of us were taught that if you put a tourniquet on somebody, they're going to lose a limb. The reason why in the conflicts from Vietnam and in World War II you didn't have all these soldiers coming back as amputees was because amputees back then died. Nowadays, yeah, those blasts and mines and IEDs still cause them to lose those limbs, but they live through the injuries. So tourniquets save lives and they don't cause you to lose limbs. Trust me, I've replaced plenty of tourniquets. And Sal's done way more. All right, bleeding. Identify life-threatening bleeding. So the first thing you're going to do is find the source of the bleeding. The things you're looking for: continuous bleeding, large volume bleeding, or pooling of blood. Basically, if the bleeding won't stop, if you wrapped it in bandaging and the bandages are getting soaked, or if it looks like a lot of bleeding, or if the patient is sitting there and the blood is just pooling around them, it's a lot of blood. That's serious bleeding that needs to be controlled. The easiest way to do this is, if it looks serious enough, if you go up to them and you think in your head they might need a tourniquet, just go ahead and slap the tourniquet on. Because like I said earlier, of the thousands of soldiers that got them in the Middle East, only one person had a minor negative effect. The rule that's been developed in the civilian world is, as long as we get them to the care of a doctor within 2 hours and the tourniquet is removed, we'll be fine. We live in Houston. We have trauma centers on every corner. Now, right now the hospitals are full. But during normal times, if we can't get somebody, and even now that the hospitals are full, we can tell you that they will be seen by a doctor. They may not get a bed, but a doctor will come to the EMS stretcher and see them. But you're not going to hurt anybody by putting an unnecessary tourniquet on. If you are concerned enough and you think they might need a tourniquet or that bleeding needs to be controlled, just go ahead and control it. Because the last thing that we want is for you to think, well, maybe I don't need to. Maybe a tourniquet is overkill, and then that patient ends up dying. Along with identifying the bleeding is, you need to make sure you expose the area of the bleeding. Because there may be multiple places where the victim's bleeding. Clothing might hide life-threatening bleeding. So these pants that we all wear are meant to keep blood and bodily fluids off of them. So usually, we'll still get it on us, but usually the blood will just roll off. The downside of that is it also rolls off on the inside. So you'll see blood coming out of here if you're bleeding in here. So, you might get shot in the lower leg and in the upper leg, and all you see is blood running down here. So one of the things that we all teach our guys in the tactical group is just go hot. And just cut off the main. Just like when you have a pipe burst at your house, you just go to the main shutoff, right? So here, cut off the clothes, expose, and put the tourniquet above the highest bleed. If you're having trouble, or if they're shot in multiple limbs, or if they're hurt in multiple areas, just put the tourniquet as close to the torso as possible and just shut off that entire limb. Like I said, you're not going to hurt them by doing that. So we're going to go over today how to control bleeding in the arms and legs, and in the neck, armpits, and groin. We control bleeding in those two areas differently. Because the arms and legs are easy because we use tourniquets. Neck, armpits, and groin are a little bit more involved because you can't just put a tourniquet around somebody's neck. A tourniquet here won't really do much in the groin either. So, we need to have different ways of controlling bleeding. And then we have the torso and abdomen. And we'll go over that in the end. Like I said, that's something that we cover in Texas because we have a little bit more faith in you guys than in the people of Nebraska. So the first thing we do is compress. Pressure is the fastest, easiest thing. If you call 911 and you tell them that somebody is bleeding heavily, the first thing that they'll tell you to do is apply pressure. Pressure can control 99% of bleeds. You just hold it tight enough. The nice thing about that is you don't need a tourniquet. So, if you have gauze, use that. But most people don't have gauze and tourniquets and stop the bleeding kits at home. The nice thing is most people have a shirt or a rag or something available like that. So I personally don't like to use my own shirts, but if they have a shirt, use their clothes. Or find a rag. Try to use something clean because infection is a thing. So try to find something as clean as possible. Put it on the bleed and put pressure specifically on the bleed. So, Chief Work, can you come up here, please? So let's say, just for the sake of argument, he's got a laceration right here. Instead of just putting pressure here over it, or here over it, I'm going to actually put my fingers in the laceration to put pressure on it. Alright, thanks. Thank you. That's how we compress it. You're putting pressure inside of it. Just enough pressure to stop the bleeding. Sometimes you're going to have to white knuckle it. And sometimes you can just let go a little bit and you'll see that it doesn't take as much pressure. It just depends on the person, the type of blood vessels involved, all kinds of things. And if you need somebody to relieve you and hold pressure and all that stuff, you can always do that if there's multiple people around you. So you apply the pressure directly to the wound, focus on the location of the bleeding, like I just said. Use just enough gauze or cloth to cover the bleeding. If you use a ton more, you're not going to apply that, you're distributing that pressure more. So you're not applying that pressure directly to the bleeding, which just means that you're creating more work for yourself. If the pressure stops the bleeding, keep the pressure on the wound until help arrives. Because if you stop that pressure, at that point you're acting like the clot. So if you stop that pressure, you're basically just undoing all the work you just did and they're going to start bleeding again. Packing the wounds. That's one of our skill stations later. For large wounds, superficial pressure isn't effective. So if they're bleeding, and it's not really large wounds, it's deep wounds. So if the bleeding is from a deep wound, you're going to pack gauze tightly into the wound until it stops bleeding. And you're going to hold pressure on top of that until help arrives. So a bleeding control kit might contain hemostatic gauze, which is gauze that's coated with a material that helps stop bleeding. Basically, it increases clot production. Both types of gauze can be used. The hemostatic gauze is better, but the other one works pretty well. So we'll show you all how to do it. Bleeding control kits will include at least one type of gauze. The more expensive one includes the hemostatic gauze. So this video walks you through it. So there's the cut. See, they're just kind of stuffing it in. We're going to show you a little bit of a better way to do it that's a little more organized. But that's basically all you're doing. Just stuffing the wound. And I know they're moving kind of slow there. When they're actually bleeding, you want to move a little bit faster. All right. All right, tourniquets. So this says apply 2 to 3 inches above the wound. If they only have one wound, apply it 2 to 3 inches above the wound. If they have multiple wounds on the same limb, apply it 2 to 3 inches above the highest wound, the wound that's closest to the torso. If they have a ton of wounds, or you just don't have time, just apply it as close to the torso as you can. Don't place it over the elbow or over the knee, because if you place it over a joint, that tourniquet is not going to do anything. Tighten the tourniquet until bleeding stops. That's how you know it's working. And don't remove the tourniquet. The only people that should be removing tourniquets are paramedics and physicians. And generally, I can tell you that paramedics won't remove it. They'll usually leave it to the physician. You can apply the tourniquet on others or on yourself. And they can be applied over clothes. However, generally we prefer that they not be, so that you can expose the bleeding. Tourniquets hurt. They're going to be painful. When we do training on them, and you get a bunch of tourniquets applied on you, or you even have one on you for a while, you end up with a bruise. But it's better than bleeding out and dying. We carry pain medication. Remember, you're stopping that bleeding because it takes the ambulance from about 5 to 7 minutes to get to them. And then they can help with that pain. But at least you've taken care of the life-threatening issue. If they're in pain, that means they're not dead. A second tourniquet might be required to stop the bleeding. Especially if you're putting a tourniquet on the thighs, or if the person is very large, you may need to use 2 tourniquets. In that case, you want to put them very close together, usually within 2 inches of each other, because you don't want a space, you don't want a big space in between the 2 tourniquets. That's going to cause all kinds of medical issues for you. So, 2 tourniquets close together. All you want to do is offset them so that you can actually twist the windlasses on both of them. All right, this video shows how to apply a tourniquet. So they're wrapping the tourniquet. They're putting the strap through the loop. The first loop and tighten is the most important one. You don't put it immediately through the retaining hook. Then you turn the windlass. Usually you turn it 2 to 3 times. Then you put it through the hook. You put the strap through. And then you put the retaining strap above the whole thing, and the last thing that you do is write the time on it. The time is important so that we know how long the tourniquet has been on there. Like I said, we don't like to leave them on for more than 2 hours. So real quick, we'll go over tourniquets. There's a few tourniquets that are recommended by the Committee on TCCC. And they're the ones that decide which tourniquets can be used in the United States. The 2 big ones that are used by the military are the CAT and soft T. The Committee on TCCC does not recommend any tourniquet over any other tourniquet. However, the 2 that the Department of Defense buys are the CAT and the soft T. What I'll tell you is, if you're ever in a position where you need to apply a tourniquet on yourself, the CAT is a lot easier. The SAM XT comes in different sizes and different colors. It's great for kids. I think a kid-friendly tourniquet is a little scary, but... and then we have a few different ones there. This is a list of all the Committee on TCCC recommended stop-and-bleed tourniquets. this is saying is if you go out and you buy your own tourniquet, please do not buy a tourniquet that is not on this list. It means it's not approved. What I would also recommend is that you buy one from a reputable source. Either the Stop the Bleed website, North American Rescue, a real medical dealer. Because if you go on Amazon and you buy a tourniquet will normally cost you around $45. If you go to Amazon and you buy a $20 tourniquet, it's going to break. And I understand that you're saving 20 bucks, but if you want something that's going to save your life, you don't want it to break when you're using it. And trust me, I've seen it. A lot of the cops that I work with buy their own tourniquets. And I will pull those out of their pockets sometimes when it's the fake ones, and we'll use them in training just to show them that they will break. And they'll break on the first or second use. Pneumatic limb tourniquets are also useful, especially if you think that a kid is going to use them, because those can inflate. So the Delphi EMT and the Tactical Pneumatic Tourniquet, those are both recommended by the Department of Defense and the National Association of EMTs and the Committee on TCCC. We'll go over bleeding control in children real quick. In all but the extremely young children, tourniquets can be used in adults. The tourniquets that can be used in adults can be used in children as well. What I'll say is in the majority of kids, and especially infants, direct pressure works really well. You don't usually need to apply a tourniquet on a kid. However, like I said before, if you think you need to apply a tourniquet, just go ahead and do it. If a tourniquet was needlessly applied, you're not going to harm them, and the physicians are great about removing them quickly. For large, deep wounds, wound packing can be performed in kids just like in adults. You're just going to have more left over to hold pressure on top. And you use the exact same technique. All right. Like I said, in Texas, we trust you to do a few more things. So I'll go over hypothermia real quick. So one of the things about trauma is we have the trauma triangle, which just to get into a little bit of anatomy with you, your body works on a pH balance. And your body works on homeostasis, which means that you need a certain temperature for everything to work together, and you need a certain pH for everything to work well together. When you start losing blood, you start losing temperature. You also start becoming more acidotic. When you become more acidotic, your blood doesn't clot as well. When you lose temperature, your blood doesn't clot as well. When you lose temperature, you become more acidotic, and when you become more acidotic, you lose temperature. So all these things worsen all these other things. So, and as you bleed out, you lose temperature and you become more acidotic. So we're trying to treat the whole patient here, right? So stop the bleeding, yes. We can't really do anything to treat the acidosis yet with you guys. But we can definitely treat temperature. So one of the things that we're carrying that a lot of bleeding control kits have is this thermal blanket. It looks like a big thing of foil. You wrap it around the patient. Probably most of y'all that go camping a lot have seen them. They're just an emergency blanket. You wrap the patient up, you keep them warm. Other big things to consider is if they are on a tile floor, get them off the tile floor. Put them on carpet. Put them on something at least, if you don't have anything better, that is going to conserve their heat. One of the things we use is called a Ready Heat blanket. I love these things. They're like 20 bucks. You open it up, it's a chemical reaction. Basically in 5 minutes it heats up to 100 degrees, which is a little bit hotter than the human body should be, but a little bit of heat isn't going to hurt a trauma patient. And it maintains that temperature for 24 hours. And now Chief Rourke is going to talk about chest wounds. my name is David George. I'm a battalion chief here. I'm the shift commander of our A shift. I'm happy to be here talking to you guys. I'm glad you guys are here to learn this stuff. So, when we start talking about puncture wounds in the core of our body, right? There's a lot of vasculature, there's a lot of things going on here that we just can't get to in the field. They need a surgeon. I mean, with any of these patients, they need a surgeon. The things that we can really address really well in the body is it's basically a big hole full of stuff, right? It's a big cavity full of a lot of stuff that we have to protect. Up here in the top half of your body, where your lungs are, right? There's air in here, and you know, I'm sure you guys understand this, but for the point of review here, when I breathe in, right, I contract my diaphragm and I expand my chest wall, right? What I do is I increase the amount of space in here, which decreases the air pressure. When I decrease that air pressure, air is going to go through my airway into my chest, right? So it causes my lungs to expand, gas exchange occurs, everybody's happy. Then you relax your diaphragm, my chest cavity gets smaller, air pressure goes up inside, and I push air back out. Right? Yes, ma'am.
Could you please talk louder where they can hear it?
Sure.
Thank you.
So what's happening is I'm playing with the air pressure in my chest cavity so that I can breathe in and out. It works very well if I only have one opening into my chest cavity. That makes sense? If someone puts a hole in my chest, I get what you probably see in the movies called a sucking chest wound. And that means when I try to breathe and the air pressure drops, air is going to suck in through my airway, but it's also going to come in through the hole, right? Now I have air inside of my chest that is not inside of the lungs, and that's not great. What ends up happening is as I do that over and over, more air gets into my chest, and the lung on that side of the chest can start to collapse. That's where you hear the term collapsed lung, right? So up here, I have to keep air from getting in the chest up here. Down here, we don't have that same problem, but the thing that's going to get us down here, if it's not bleeding, is infection, right? We don't want to get bad stuff in here. So these seals are good for anywhere in the core, right? It's a plastic seal. And if you can look at it, what you'll see, this is the glue, and you'll see 3 channels going through here, right? It looks kind of like a 3-pointed star. I know it's kind of hard to see in the back there. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take it out, take off the glue. I'm going to put the center of this star right over the wound. Okay? What that causes is when I suck in and the pressure decreases in my chest, it's going to suck up against the wound and it's not going to let any air go in through here. Right? So I can breathe through my airway. When I blow out, because I have these 3 channels here, the air pressure increases. Any air that's trapped will blow it out. It'll push the bandage away, and the air can escape through these channels. So hopefully, we can start to solve the problem rather than just stopping the problem from getting worse, right? Now, these are a couple of bucks. Again, you can find these on websites like Stop the Bleed or companies like North American Rescue. If you don't have access to this, just plastic. Saran wrap is great for this, okay? And it'll go anywhere. You can do that anywhere on the torso. If it's not up here, down here, put something plastic over it to keep stuff from getting inside. Yeah, sorry, I'm on duty right now. Anyway, so these are a very valuable tool, but we can also do it with plastic. When we're teaching our EMT guys, if you come up and you see a hole on the torso, we teach them, oh, hey, I found a hole. First thing I'm going to do, take my gloved hand, put it over that hole to stop the problem from getting worse. Tell your partner, hey, get me a chest seal. That makes sense, because the gloved hand is going to do the same thing as this. As soon as I get this on here, I can move on. I think that is it for this. Yeah. Oh, other thing, you may have to dry it off, right? If there's blood around it, make sure it's dry around there before you put it on there so it'll stick. All right, a few things to address real quick. Impaled objects, don't take them out. If there's a knife sticking in somebody when you get there or when you see them, if there is a bullet, if there is a fence post, whatever, don't take it out. Those kinds of things, while they look scary, are great at stopping the bleeding themselves. So basically, just like the pressure that you would exert on the blood vessels, they're exerting pressure too. Don't move it. If you pull it out, then you're creating a hole, and the body likes to feel pressure. So just like with the chest seal issue, you're going to have blood rush into there. Don't do it. To stabilize the object, if you feel the need to touch it at all or you need to move the person, just wrap gauze around it, make sure it stays where it is, make sure it doesn't move. Improvised tourniquets. The Committee on CCCC, the National Association of EMTs, and the Committee on Trauma of the American College of Surgeons do not recommend that tourniquets be improvised in the civilian setting because what the studies show is that in the time that it takes you to gather the materials and improvise the tourniquet, if you would have just been holding pressure, the patient has lost more blood, will have lost more blood by the time the ambulance arrives than if you would have just held pressure. This is different in the military world where they don't have an ambulance 5 minutes away. Or sometimes in some rural settings, or if you're hiking or something like that. In which case, if you're going camping, if you're hiking, please get a stop the bleed kit and just have tourniquets with you. Like I said, it's $45, just do it. But if you're in Atascocita, I promise you we will have someone there within 5 minutes. We all carry a ton of tourniquets on every ambulance and fire truck and squad and every apparatus we have. I think we have like 8 on each one. At least 6 that I can think of like right off the top of my head. So just hold pressure if you don't have a tourniquet. Pain. They are painful. They will scream. They will not like you. They may try to kick you or hurt you or punch you. Don't worry about it. We'll deal with the pain. We're very big on pain control. We carry all kinds of pain medicines, and I don't like to listen to screaming. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Did you say that the kit can be purchased on the Stop the Bleed website?
Yes, ma'am. StopTheBleed.org, I think. Yeah, StopTheBleed.org. We'll give you links. There's also Deployed Medicine is something that you can Google. It's one of the military websites. They have a lot of links to actually videos on how to do things. Those are great for people that go camping and hiking and all that stuff a lot. They'll show you how to do a lot of remote medicine stuff. And North American Rescue sells a lot of these kits as well. StopTheBleed.org and BleedingControl.org have all the resources that we use for this class. Any other questions, sir?
Are these samples that we should buy, or are these for us?
No, sir. Those are, we're going to practice skills later. Those are for the skills practice. But those are like the tourniquets that you should buy. What you should know basically is tourniquets. Those combat application tourniquets, CAT tourniquets, come in 3 colors. Blue, black, and orange. Here at Atascocita, basically blue is always training. They're more expensive because they're training tourniquets, even though there's nothing different about them except they're blue. Then there's orange and black. Those are the same price. Black are always patient use, and orange you can choose depending on your department. Here in Atascocita, we've chosen to use orange for our training. Basically, they're the same price as the black ones, so they're cheaper than the blue ones, so it's just more taxpayer friendly to use those for training. So we use orange ones for training and black for patient use. That's it. So we'll use those in a second. Quick summary. Personal safety. Call 911, find the bleeding, compress with pressure and or packing, compress with a tourniquet if you need to, and wait for help to arrive. All right, real quick. Before we get to the skills portion, if you are over 60 years old, please tell your partner. Usually, when we're doing this with our firefighters and all that stuff, we don't have them apply, or we do have them apply the tourniquets with full force because we want everybody to practice the way they would normally do it. What bleeding control says is if you are over 60 years old, do not have them apply the tourniquet to you fully because they're afraid of blood clots. Probably won't happen, but we're not taking that chance. So don't have it applied to you full force, but definitely go through the motions. If we have any volunteers that would like to have multiple tourniquets applied to them so everybody can practice applying a tourniquet full force, we'll go ahead and do that. And we will go over how to stage a tourniquet first. Chief, you got one? I see it. All right. So everybody's got a tourniquet in front of them, I hope. So go ahead and unroll it first. These tourniquets come pre-packaged. They should come pre-staged, but you want to make sure they're staged correctly. I saw, just looking around, I saw that some of these weren't staged the right way. The reason why we stage them a specific way is because we want them to be ready to use as soon as you need to use them. So this is how they'll be on every ambulance and stuff like this, and apparatus that we have. So roll out your tourniquet, make sure that your windlass is open like this, and just stretch it out to make sure that your windlass strap is as loose as possible. Do it. All right. Next, you're going to hold your tourniquet with one hand with the hook or the loop up front, like this. Your tourniquet has a red tip that North American Rescue refers to fondly as red tip technology. Pass that through the loop and go about 5 to 6 inches down and Velcro it down. Should look something like this now. One continuous loop.
So we're gonna put it through like this, and then we're only gonna pull it about 5 inches like that.
Alright, once everybody's there, you take your little double-sided part, you leave it there, and basically what you're going to do is take your 2 Velcro sides and put them together to where now your tourniquet kind of stays in one piece.
So I'm just gonna take it. So I've got it, I just folded 5 inches. I'm gonna build it, bend it about in half, right there, and just fold Velcro on top. Yeah, perfect, just like that.
Tourniquet stays together. Last thing you're going to do is fold your windlass into the hook, and that's it.
And then the holder.
I know it looks real pretty to put the holder like this. It also defeats a lot of the purpose of the tourniquet, so don't do that. So,
Put it off to the side.
you'll see a lot of people that have tourniquets, especially on the holsters, that are, real tactical people and stuff.
That's like this.
You don't want that. You want it to the side.
I'll show you why. But
If you look at military photos and stuff, you'll see that they all have them to the side like this. The reason for that is you need to be able to apply this one arm. Because if you're applying it to yourself, you may only be able to use one hand. So you need to be able to do this. Unfold it with one hand. Put it on your arm. Go like this. Pull. Yank. Turn.
But if you're holding pressure on somebody, you want to be able to push this and just wiggle it.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, that way you don't have to undo it, especially if you're holding pressure on somebody else. Does anybody need some help? Is everyone comfortable?
So you don't want to put it, if you put it on your arm, you want to put it on this way, because you always, if you're pulling with this arm, you want to pull toward that arm. No, ma'am. So put it on this arm. Okay. So then, alright, so then grab with this hand. Grab here. And just pull. There you go. Alright.
And you pull it reasonably tight,
What's that?
reasonably tight before
Tight.
you start to turn.
So, what's that? So realistically, you pull as tight as you can. Because realistically on that first pull is the most important one, because that's going to basically set how tight you can do everything else. You want to pull that first one as tight as you can. Because if not, you're going to be sitting there twisting that windlass a lot. Alright. Next, restage your tourniquet. And we're going to apply to our partners.
Yeah.
So when you apply to your partners,
Let them restage.
one
Once y'all get it restaged, just look up here and we'll do an example here. So remember, you're going to pull it straight out through the strap. Pull down 5 to 6 inches, and then fold it. Don't put them up. Perfect.
If I pull this as tight as I can in the beginning, I may or may not be able to make a full turn with this.
Then you'll definitely need to get help, because he's about to show you.
Okay.
But part of the deal is you need to get it as tight as you can, because if it's not as tight as you can, it should be difficult to turn.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to apply enough pressure to get through all of this meat.
That's the reason you say it's gonna hurt.
Yeah, it's gonna hurt a lot. Just be careful.
It's gonna hurt.
Yeah.
So when you apply it to your partner, one of the things that we did is, I don't know if you guys saw, when I applied it to myself, I had the red tip facing towards me, because it's a lot easier to pull hard when you're pulling towards the arm that's pulling. So if I'm applying it on this side, I'm yanking this way. If I'm applying it on this side, I'm yanking this way. If you're applying it on another person, that doesn't matter as much as if you're pulling towards yourself. So if I'm in front of him, red towards me. If I'm behind him, red towards me again. So we'll say the injury's here, 2 to 3 inches above, just like that. Basically I slipped it above,